In 1648, a woman in Boston was executed for a crime that will shock you. Her name was Margaret Jones, and she wasn't killed for casting spells or flying on broomsticks. She was hanged because she was better at saving lives than the male doctors. This is the story they don't want you to know about America's first witch. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why powerful women have always been society's greatest threat. Today we're diving into The First Witch of Boston by Andrea Catalano, a book based on actual court records and diary entries from 1648. As someone who's studied countless historical injustices, this story made my blood boil. Because Margaret Jones wasn't just America's first executed witch, she was America's first victim of what we now call medical misogyny. But here's what will blow your mind. Everything she was killed for, doctors do legally today. So grab your coffee, buckle up, and prepare to get angry at history. But first, let me ask you something. If you lived in 1648 Boston, would you be considered a witch? Have you ever challenged a doctor's diagnosis, spoken up when authority figures were wrong, knew more about something than the experts in the room? If yes, drop a guilty in the comments, because congratulations, you would have been witch material. Now smash that like button, because this story is about to make you question everything you thought you knew about American history. Picture this, it's 1646, and Margaret Jones arrives in Boston with her husband Thomas. She's a skilled midwife and healer who learned her craft in England. While male doctors are still using bloodletting and prayers, Margaret is using herbs, proper hygiene, and revolutionary concept, actually listening to her patients. And here's the thing that made everyone nervous: she was good at it. Really good. Women who were dying in childbirth under male doctors, Margaret saved them. Infections that doctors couldn't cure, Margaret healed them with herbal remedies. But in Puritan Boston, there was one unforgivable sin: being a woman who was better than men at something men were supposed to control. And medicine? That was definitely a man's domain. According to the actual court records, Margaret had what they called a malignant touch. Translation: her patients got better when she treated them. Let that sink in. She was literally accused of witchcraft for being an effective healer. But here's where it gets insidious. Margaret didn't just heal quietly, she spoke up. When she saw male doctors using dangerous treatments, she said something. When authority figures made medical decisions that would harm patients, she challenged them. In 2024, we'd call this being a good healthcare advocate. In 1648, they called it witchcraft. Now you might be thinking, surely they needed real evidence to execute someone, right? Wrong. The evidence they used against Margaret Jones is so ridiculous, it would be comedy if it wasn't so tragic. But before I reveal the absurd charges that cost her life, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever been punished for being too good at something? Because what happened next is a masterclass in how society destroys women who dare to excel. Chapter 2: The Ridiculous Evidence. All right, let's talk about the evidence that convinced a court to execute Margaret Jones. Buckle up, because this is going to make you lose faith in humanity. Charge number 1, and I'm reading directly from the 1648 court records, quote, that she was found to have such a malignant touch, as many persons were taken with deafness or vomiting or other violent pains or sickness. End quote. Read that again. She was accused of witchcraft because some of her patients got sick. Not that she made them sick, just that some people who saw her eventually got sick. By this logic, every doctor today would be a witch because, newsflash, sick people sometimes stay sick even after treatment. But wait, it gets worse. Charge number 2, her medicines being such things as were harmless, yet had extraordinary violent effects. So let me get this straight, her medicines were harmless but effective. In witch trial logic, this was suspicious. If you're curing people without dangerous side effects, you must be using magic. Today, we call this evidence-based medicine. We want treatments that work without harmful side effects. But in 1648 Boston, if you weren't torturing patients with bloodletting and toxic mercury, you were obviously in league with the devil. Charge number 3, and this one will make your head explode. She would use to tell such as would not make use of her physic that they would never be healed, and accordingly their diseases and hurts continued, with relapse against the ordinary course of nature. They accused her of witchcraft because patients who refused her treatment didn't get better. Think about this. Margaret would examine someone, recommend treatment, they'd refuse, stay sick, and somehow this was her fault. This is like blaming a firefighter for fires that happen in buildings where the owners refuse to install sprinklers. Modern parallel images. Doctors' medical advice being ignored. But here's the real kicker, the final charge. That she practiced physic. She practiced medicine. That was literally listed as evidence of witchcraft. A woman knowing medicine was inherently suspicious. Now here's the part that will haunt you. Margaret Jones wasn't some isolated case of medieval ignorance. She represents a pattern that continues today. When women excel in male-dominated fields, society finds ways to tear them down. Studies show that female doctors are still questioned more than male doctors. Women in tech are called aggressive for the same behavior that makes men natural leaders. Female CEOs are scrutinized for decisions that would make male CEOs look decisive. Margaret Jones died because she threatened the medical establishment's power. Her success exposed their incompetence. Her knowledge challenged their authority. Her voice disrupted their control. She wasn't executed for being a witch. She was executed for being a competent woman in a world that couldn't handle competent women. Before I tell you how Margaret's story ends, and trust me, you need to hear this, I want you to think about the Margaret Joneses in your life. The female colleagues who get dismissed. The women whose expertise gets questioned. The girls who get called bossy for showing leadership. Drop their names in the comments. Let's honor the modern Margaret Joneses who are still fighting this battle. Chapter 3. The Trial That Shocked Nobody. June 15, 1648. Margaret Jones stood trial in Boston. The proceedings lasted less than a day. No defense witnesses were called. No one questioned the absurd evidence. The outcome was predetermined the moment a successful woman threatened powerful men. But here's what the history books don't tell you: Margaret's husband Thomas fought for her. In a time when most men would abandon a wife accused of witchcraft, Thomas Jones defended her publicly. He testified to her character, her skill, her compassion. It didn't matter. The court found Margaret guilty on all charges. The sentence? Death by hanging, for the crime of being a skilled healer who spoke her mind. Margaret Jones was hanged on June 15, 1648, making her the first person executed for witchcraft in Massachusetts Bay Colony. She was 35 years old. She left behind a husband who loved her and patients who needed her. But here's the twist that shows how fabricated this whole thing was. After Margaret's execution, some of her victims miraculously recovered. You know why? Because the malignant touch that supposedly made them sick was gone, almost like they were never actually bewitched. The authorities conveniently ignored this detail. Can't let facts get in the way of a good witch burning, right? Chapter 4. The Legacy of Margaret Jones. Now, you might think this is just a tragic historical footnote. But Margaret Jones' story reveals something crucial about how society has always dealt with threatening women. It destroys them, and then rewrites history to justify it. Think about it: how many difficult women in history were actually just competent women in impossible situations? How many hysterical women were actually making valid points that men didn't want to hear? How many witches were just women who knew too much? Margaret Jones died 44 years before the Salem witch trials made witchcraft accusations famous. She was the prototype, the test case that showed society it could legally murder women for being too successful, too knowledgeable, too outspoken. And here's the most chilling part: it worked. After Margaret's execution, women healers throughout New England went underground. Female midwives stopped speaking up about dangerous medical practices. Women learned to hide their knowledge, dim their expertise, silence their voices. Margaret Jones wasn't just the first witch executed in Boston. She was the first woman publicly executed for refusing to shrink herself to fit society's expectations. So what can we learn from Margaret Jones in 2024? First, competent women will always threaten insecure systems. If you're being called too much, too aggressive, or too opinionated, you might be following in Margaret's footsteps. Second, silence isn't safety. Margaret tried to work within the system, but the system was designed to crush women like her. Sometimes the only way to honor women like Margaret is to refuse to be silenced. Third, document everything. Margaret's story survived because people wrote it down. Your achievements, your challenges, your voice, record it all. Future generations need to know that women like you existed and fought. Here's what I want you to do: share this video with every woman who needs to hear Margaret's story. Comment below with one way you refuse to shrink yourself. Subscribe for more stories about badass women history tried to erase. Margaret Jones was hanged as the first witch of Boston. But she wasn't a witch, she was a healer, a challenger, a voice of truth in a world that preferred comfortable lies. And in 2024, the best way to honor her memory is to be exactly the kind of woman that would have terrified them in 1648. Be loud, be competent, be unafraid, be the witch they warned you about.